The countdown is over. The Labour Party has just exploded into chaos, and the man once seen as untouchable, Sir Keir Starmer, is now standing on the edge of total collapse. In a single day, 43 MPs, yes 43, have walked out tearing the party apart and leaving Westminster reeling. At the heart of the storm is a scandal so staggering, so shocking, that even Starmer's most loyal defenders have turned against him. A missing fortune, £22 billion, vanished, gone. And with it, the last fragments of trust in Starmer's leadership. Tonight, Britain is watching history unfold live. The first cracks appeared quietly whispers in the corridors of power. Rumours passed between journalists and aides. But then, without warning, the silence broke. Letters of resignation began flooding in. At first, 1 MP, then 3, then 10. Within hours, it was no longer a trickle. It was a tidal wave. By midday, 43 resignations had landed like hammer blows on Starmer's leadership. And Westminster knew this was no ordinary dispute. This was mutiny. What made the rebellion impossible to ignore was not just the numbers, but the evidence. Each MP who walked away carried with them documents, emails, financial records, and damning proof of a scandal that had been festering in the shadows. According to them, £22 billion had been funneled into secretive firms and shady contracts tied to Starmer's advisors and donors. Money meant for public services. Money that should have gone to hospitals, schools, and housing. Instead, it disappeared into the hands of companies that, on paper, promised big projects, but in reality delivered nothing. One firm received billions for consultancy services, yet left behind no reports, no data, no trace of real work. Another company, allegedly set up to manage outreach and grassroots engagement, pocketed huge sums, but never organised a single event. These weren't accidents, they weren't clerical errors. As resignation letters revealed, this was a deliberate operation. An orchestrated system of deception designed to drain money from the public and feed it into private pockets. The most devastating blow landed when Labour's Shadow Home Secretary appeared on live television. Her voice shook with emotion, but her words were sharp and precise. This is not leadership. This is betrayal. She described how questions about the contracts were buried, how MPs who dared to challenge the leadership were silenced, sidelined, even threatened with deselection. Within the hour, the Shadow Chancellor followed with her own statement, admitting that she had personally been blocked from uncovering the truth. Her words cut deep. We were told unity was the priority, but unity cannot mean covering up corruption. And with that, the dominoes began to fall. These were not backbench rebels or opportunists looking for headlines. These were Starmer's closest allies. Senior figures at the very core of Labour's leadership. People who had defended him through controversy after controversy. Their resignations did not just weaken him, they destroyed the illusion of control. If Starmer's most trusted allies had lost faith, what hope was left for the rest? Outside of Parliament, the fallout was instant. Local Labour branches began releasing furious statements online. Grassroots members who had spent years campaigning in rain, knocking on doors, leafleting streets, declared their trust had been shattered. Trade unions, the very backbone of Labour's funding, announced they were freezing all donations until a full investigation was launched. On social media, hashtags like #LabourCollapse and #StarmerOut rocketed to the top of trending lists, uniting voices of outrage from every corner of the nation. Yet, even as the walls crumbled, Starmer's team scrambled to fight back. His communications unit rushed out carefully worded statements, insisting the contracts were lawful and legitimate. They claimed the documents were taken out of context, that this was all routine restructuring, exaggerated by political enemies, but no one was convinced. For every denial, another resignation landed. For every excuse, another document leaked. For every attempt to spin the story, another senior MP went on camera and confirmed the scandal was real. Inside Parliament, the chaos only grew. Emergency meetings ended in shouting matches, slammed doors, and furious walkouts. Backbenchers who had once defended Starmer stormed out, red-faced and shouting. Journalists outside the chamber described the atmosphere as toxic, unstable, and collapsing by the minute. Then came the letter, a single document signed by all 43 resigning MPs, placed on the Chief Whip's desk. Its words were brutal and final. Keir Starmer no longer commands the moral or political authority to lead the Labour Party. The shockwaves were immediate. It wasn't just a challenge. It wasn't just disobedience. It was a death sentence for Starmer's leadership, written not by his enemies, but by his own team. As the day turned to night, the crisis spilled out of Westminster and into the streets. Crowds gathered outside Parliament holding signs, "Not in our name." Where's the £22 billion? The atmosphere was electric, heavy with anger and betrayal. This was more than a scandal. This was a breaking of trust, a collapse of faith in a party that had once claimed to stand for integrity and fairness. Labour, the party of justice, of workers, of accountability, now stood accused of embodying the very corruption it had sworn to fight. But the most chilling revelations were not about money. They were about control. Leaked emails exposed threats, intimidation, and silencing of MPs who dared to speak up. One message, cold and blunt, warned, "Pushing this narrative will have consequences." Others revealed MPs being cut off from committees, denied speaking time, stripped of responsibilities. This was not just corruption, it was authoritarianism, wrapped in party colours. And as midnight approached, one phrase echoed across Westminster, repeated by journalists, MPs, and even Starmer's former allies. "He's finished." The morning after the resignations, Britain woke up to a political earthquake still shaking the ground. Newspapers across the country carried one word in bold letters: collapse. Every front page screamed of betrayal, deception, and scandal on a scale not seen in modern politics. Television channels rolled the footage on repeat MPs stepping down one by one, documents being waved before cameras, and angry crowds chanting outside Parliament. The image was unmistakable. Labour was no longer a party in crisis. Labour was a party in ruins. Inside Westminster, the panic was spreading like fire. MPs, who had not resigned yet, were being chased through corridors by reporters demanding to know where they stood. Were they still loyal to Starmer, or were they preparing to jump ship? Some refused to answer, faces pale, eyes darting. Others lashed out, snapping at journalists, only fueling speculation that more resignations were coming. The sense of fear was unmistakable. Everyone knew the scandal had crossed a line. It was no longer about a single leader. It was about the survival of the Labour Party itself, and the details kept getting darker. Investigative reporters began digging into the leaked contracts, uncovering a pattern of corruption that stretched deeper than anyone had first believed. One firm, supposedly tasked with developing economic strategy, was paid £3.4 billion. Yet when asked to show its work, there were no reports, no drafts, no evidence of Labour. Another company was paid over £1 billion for grassroots engagement, but delivered nothing beyond vague press releases. A third, tied to a well-known party donor, received massive payments for policy consulting, but had no registered office, no staff, and no public presence. These revelations were not just embarrassing, they were damning. Billions of pounds meant for the people had been funneled into what looked like empty shells. The question now echoing across the nation was simple. If £22 billion could disappear so easily, what else was hidden in the shadows? That question burned in the minds of voters who were already struggling with high living costs, strained public services, and an economy under pressure. Families who could not afford rent or food now saw billions wasted on phantom companies. Teachers fighting for school funding, nurses begging for better conditions, workers demanding fair wages. All of them looked at the scandal and saw betrayal carved in bold letters. The fury was growing, and it was no longer confined to Twitter feeds or television screens. It was in the streets, in the pubs, in the conversations at kitchen tables. Starmer, once praised for bringing discipline and stability after years of division, now looked like a leader stripped of power and authority. His attempts to regain control fell flat. Every statement he made was met with disbelief. Every promise he offered was drowned out by chants of protest. His words, once carried with confidence, now sounded hollow, defensive, desperate. Analysts compared him to a captain standing on a sinking ship, shouting that everything was fine while the water poured in faster and faster. Meanwhile, Labour's rivals wasted no time seizing the moment. The Conservatives, despite their own history of scandals, launched a coordinated attack, declaring that Labour could never again claim the moral high ground. Senior Tory figures pointed to the missing billions as proof that Starmer's promises of accountability had been a lie. Reform UK went further, framing the collapse as evidence that the entire political establishment was rotten to the core. Nigel Farage and Richard Tice appeared on broadcasts calling for immediate snap elections, urging voters to reject both major parties and embrace what they described as a new movement for Britain. Their words struck a nerve with disillusioned citizens who felt abandoned and betrayed. Inside the Labour Party itself, the atmosphere was poisonous. Emergency meetings turned into shouting matches. Loyalists clashed with rebels, and rumours swirled that even more senior figures were preparing to resign. Whips struggled to maintain order, but the rebellion had reached a scale beyond control. MPs whispered privately that they no longer believed Labour could recover before the next election. Some admitted openly that they were already thinking about life beyond Starmer, about leadership contests and fresh faces who might salvage what remained. For many, it was no longer a question of if Starmer would fall, but when. And the most terrifying thought of all, that Labour itself might not survive the fallout. The party that had dominated British politics for decades, the party of Attlee, Wilson, Blair, was staring into an abyss. What began as a scandal about contracts and money had become something far larger. A crisis of trust, a collapse of faith, a rebellion that risked tearing the party apart from the inside out. As dawn broke on the second day of chaos, Westminster was unrecognisable. What had begun as whispers of scandal had exploded into the gravest political crisis in decades. Corridors of power were no longer filled with quiet conversations and routine business. They were battlegrounds. MPs argued in hushed tones, aides rushed between offices carrying sealed folders, and reporters crowded every corner, hungry for the next leak. The question on everyone's lips was no longer if Keir Starmer would fall, but how soon. His leadership was disintegrating in real time, and the speed of the collapse shocked even the most seasoned observers. The fallout was growing by the hour. More documents surfaced, each one more damning than the last. Emails revealed a culture of secrecy where MPs were ordered to stay silent for the good of the party. Memos instructed staff to bury financial questions, delay reports, and deny access to key figures. One chilling line, pulled from a leaked note, read, "Transparency is the enemy, control is the priority." For many, it confirmed what they already feared. This was not just incompetence. This was a system built to deceive. Public anger now burned like wildfire. Protests swelled into the tens of thousands, filling city squares and spilling into streets. Chants of "not in our name" and "where's the 22 billion" had echoed across the nation. Outside Parliament, the crowds grew so large that police erected barriers, but even those could not hold back the fury. Placards painted with words like betrayal and resign now towered above the masses. Every passing hour, the government's grip on the narrative weakened further. What once looked like a scandal confined to political insiders had become a nationwide uprising of disillusioned citizens. Meanwhile, Labour's internal machinery was collapsing. Trade unions, long considered the financial backbone of the party, hardened their stance. Several announced they were permanently cutting off funds until Starmer stepped aside. Local constituency groups drafted formal motions of no confidence, one after another, declaring they no longer recognised his authority. Inside Parliament, whispers grew louder of alternative leaders being lined up, ready to step in should Starmer be forced out. The names of potential successors began circulating in the press, but even that raised doubts. Would anyone be able to repair the damage? Or was the party too broken, too fractured, too tainted by the scandal to survive in its current form? Opposition parties continued to exploit the collapse with ruthless precision. The Conservatives declared Labour unfit to govern for a generation. Reform UK doubled down, with Nigel Farage telling furious crowds that the establishment is rotten to the core. Even the Liberal Democrats, often sidelined in recent years, seized the moment, presenting themselves as the only party untouched by corruption. For Labour, it was a nightmare scenario. Rivals circling like vultures, each one determined to claim a piece of the wreckage. Yet for all the external attacks, it was the internal rebellion that proved most lethal. By the third evening, rumours spread that even members of Starmer's inner circle were considering their positions. Cabinet meetings reportedly descended into chaos, with shouting matches erupting between loyalists and rebels. Some MPs allegedly walked out mid-discussion, slamming doors, declaring they would no longer be part of the deception. Journalists outside reported the sound of raised voices echoing down the corridors. It was, one said, the sound of a government imploding. And still, Starmer refused to step aside. His defenders clung to the argument that resignations were exaggerated, that the documents were being misread, that he could still restore order. But the country was no longer listening. The anger was too raw, the betrayal too deep. Every defence he offered was drowned out by another revelation, another protest, another headline screaming collapse. What was once a leader's struggle to manage dissent had transformed into a full-scale battle for survival, one he appeared destined to lose. The most haunting moment came when a leaked letter from the 43 resigning MPs was made public. Its closing line reverberated across Britain. "This is no longer about politics. This is about honesty, justice, and the soul of our democracy." For many citizens, it was the final confirmation that trust had been shattered beyond repair. Labour was not just facing a leadership crisis, it was facing an identity crisis, one that threatened its very existence. By midnight, commentators across every major channel were united in their verdict. Starmer's leadership was finished. Some said he would be forced to resign within days. Others predicted